Hey everybody, it's Ron from Pick Dawgz, and welcome to the NFL edition of Ron's Rundown, where we're going to go over all 16 games in Week 3 of the NFL season. If you like what you see, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Helps us out a ton. And don't forget to put your football plays in the comments section below. If you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at the Premium Picks tab at pickdawgz.com. Alrighty, here we go. Here are the games for Week 3 of the NFL season. First up, we see your Thursday Night Football contest between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cleveland Browns. This one on Prime Video at 8:15 Eastern. The Browns are 4.5-point favorites, and the total is set at 38.5, so the lowest total on the board for Week 3. Now, the Cleveland Browns had a chance to go 2-0 for the first time since 1993. They had a 30-17 lead with a $1.55 to go in regulation, and they blew that lead to the New York Jets of all teams, losing 31-30 in the end. It was a heartbreaker for Browns fans. They're still 1-1. There's still a bright future this season, but they have to grab a win here against the Steelers, their division rivals. They are 4.5-point favorites, and I do think they will grab the win in the end. On the other side, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the offense really hasn't done much. Mitchell Trubisky under 200 passing yards in each of the first 2 weeks this year, and that's despite throwing over 30 times per game. So he's had the opportunities, just the completion percentage is not there. The ground game really hasn't done too much. The offensive line has struggled overall for Pittsburgh, so the offense not doing much. The defense forced a lot of takeaways Week 1, but still giving up a good amount of yards this season, over 400 yards per game in the first 2 games, so not the largest sample size, but the Patriots were able to move the ball on the ground. Mac Jones made some nice passes, especially that deep one to Nelson Aguilar. So, the Steelers, I think, have some issues, and they're still struggling a little bit with the ground game defense, and the Browns, we know, they can run the football very well. They did so against the Jets, they did so against the Panthers, and they've got one of the better offensive lines in football. They've got 2 of the better running backs in the league, in Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. So I think the Browns are going to focus on their ground game here. And with the Steelers' offensive struggles, I just don't think this game gets over the total. I think this is a low total for a reason. I think it's going to be a typical defensive game. Give me the under in this Thursday Night Football game between the Steelers and Browns. Next up, we see our first 1 o'clock game of the Sunday schedule. It's the Houston Texans and the Chicago Bears. The Bears are 3-point favorites, and the total is set at 40.5. Now, the Bears offensively have been pretty conservative so far this year, as only 17 and 11 passing attempts from Justin Fields in the first 2 weeks. And, last week, the first week you can make the argument, it was a really bad weather. Neither quarterback did much at all. So it's pretty much expected for him to only have those pass attempts. But in week 2, they were down by multiple scores for the Green Bay Packers. There was a good opportunity to start getting going with the passing game, but only 11 passing attempts for 70 yards, 7 completions. Not what you're used to seeing from an NFL quarterback. And, the Bears' offensive line hasn't been the best. The run game's kind of been inconsistent. So the offense still, a lot to be seen, but they have faced 2 tough defenses in the Packers and the 49ers. So, now they get a spot here against the Houston Texans at Soldier Field. This is a spot where I do think the Bears' offense opens up a bit. On the other side, Houston's defense has not been great this season. Week 1, 517 total yards allowed to the Indianapolis Colts, and they really struggled down the stretch in that game to get a stop. In Week 2, they held the Broncos to 16 points, but still, the run defense was not great, giving up 4.8 yards per carry. Russell Wilson had a lot of incompletions. He was missing one of his best targets in Jerry Jeudy for most of that game. So, I don't know if it was more of Houston's good defense or Russell Wilson struggling with his new team right now. We'll have to see in this week. I think the Bears are still the better team, even though it's slightly. I think both of these teams are not going to make the playoffs this year. Both of these teams well below 500 overall, but I do think the Bears are the better team, and since they're playing at home and only laying 3 points, that's where I'm leaning. So give me the Chicago Bears laying the 3 at home. Next up, we see the Las Vegas Raiders taking on the Tennessee Titans. We're going to see the Raiders as 2-point favorites, and the total set at 45.5. Now, the Las Vegas Raiders are 0-2 to start the year, and we knew going into this season their schedule was going to be tough early on. The Chargers, the Cardinals to start the year. Now they got the Titans on the road. Then they play the Broncos at home, and then the Chiefs on the road. Those are 5 tough teams, 5 teams that either made the playoffs last year or certainly had expectations to make the playoffs this year. So, the Raiders, they struggled in the second half of the game against the Cardinals last week. They were dominating at halftime, 20-0. They had a 258 to 86 yard advantage, and then just the wheels wheels fell off for the Raiders. The offense couldn't get anything going. The defense couldn't get a stop. And then in overtime, we saw two fumbles by Hunter Renfrow. One was recovered by the offense, and then the other one picked up by the defense for the scoop and score to win it for Arizona. I do think the Raiders are the better team in this matchup. We saw the Tennessee Titans look embarrassing on Monday Night Football against the Buffalo Bills, 41-7. It was all Bills from start to finish of that one. It was just a tough one to watch. The Titans only had 187 total yards of offense. Ryan Tannehill, 12 of 24 for 107 passing yards. That's not going to get it done. And the defense, 313 passing yards allowed, and that was mostly through the first 3 quarters of the game, because in the fourth quarter, the Bills took out their starters on offense, and it was a really tough game to watch for Titans fans. And now 0-2 to start the year. This is a virtual must-win from either of these teams, as we know that going 0-2 to start the year, your playoff chances are not great. When you start 0-3, even worse. So this should be a really good game to watch, but I think the Raiders are just a better team right now on both sides of the ball. So I'm going to take them laying the points, even though they're in a tough road environment in Tennessee. We saw the Giants upset Tennessee in Tennessee the first week. So give me the Raiders laying the 2 points on the road. Next up, we see the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Indianapolis Colts. We're going to see the Colts as a 7-point underdog at home, and the total set at 49.5. Now, I think this is a case of just too many points and a little bit of overreaction as well, as the Chiefs have looked great through the first 2 weeks of the season. The Colts certainly have not, and they did not play well at all last week against the Jaguars, 24-0 on the road. We know the Colts have struggled in Jacksonville the last 10 years or so not surprising there, but Matt Ryan, one of the worst games he's had in his career. He was without his top 2 receivers. It does look like Michael Pittman will be back for this game, which is a huge gain for this offense. And I do think that Jonathan Taylor, he didn't have a lot of carries in week 2 because the Colts were down for most of that game, so they weren't really able to run the football. He's still one of the better running backs in the league. This is still one of the better offensive lines in the league, in my opinion. And, I think in week 2, the Chiefs, they won the game 27-24. To me, watching the game, I didn't think that they deserved that win. They were outgained by 401 to 319 total yards. It wasn't the best performance we've seen from Patrick Mahomes. He certainly had better games. 226 total passing yards, a lot less than what we're used to seeing from him. The secondary for Kansas City gave up 326 through the air to Justin Herbert and company. And I do think that the Colts will be able to move the ball here and score enough points to at least cover the spread, and who knows, maybe even pull out a big-time upset. I'm going to take the points here with the Indianapolis Colts. I'm going to take them as the home dog. Next up, we see one of the more highly anticipated games of the week. It's the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins. The Bills are 5.5-point favorites, and the total set at 53 points, one of the higher totals of the week. And we've got two teams that are 2-0, two teams that have looked pretty dominant on both sides of the ball. The Miami Dolphins giving up those 38 points last week against the Ravens, which is concerning. They gave up 473 total yards, 318 passing yards. They didn't really do well against the ground game either, giving up 6.2 yards per carry. And now you're facing a Buffalo Bills offense that has just been outstanding, basically scoring at will, moving the ball at will. They put up 31 points against the defending Super Bowl champs in week 1, and then they put up 41 points. Now, some of that was because of the defense, but 41 points against the Tennessee Titans in week 2 Monday Night Football. The defense has been outstanding for Buffalo as well, not really giving up much in either on the ground or through the air, earning 9 sacks through the first 2 weeks combined. Right now, the Buffalo Bills are certainly the best team in football. There's no doubting that. And until they show me any kind of signs of weakness, I've got to take them in this spot. They played pretty well against the Dolphins in years past. Last season, beating the Dolphins on the road 35-0. So they played well in Miami. I do think they grabbed the win here and the cover. So give me the Buffalo Bills laying the 5.5 points. Next up, we head to the NFC North as the Detroit Lions take on the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings are 6-point favorites, a total set at 53.5, so even higher than the previous game's total. Now, the Vikings really disappointing on Monday Night Football in Philadelphia. We know Kirk Cousins struggles in primetime. Now he's 8-18 in primetime games in his career. The Vikings offense didn't do much at all. The defense also struggled. We saw Cousins make a lot of mistakes. So, kind of a throwaway game, in my opinion, for this Vikings team. They still looked incredible week 1 against the Packers, and I think they have a nice bounce-back performance here at home, especially offensively against a really weak Lions defense. Now, sure, the Lions offense has been explosive this season. They put up 30-plus points in both of their first 2 games against the Eagles and the Commanders. And the offense last week, Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of the more explosive wide receivers in the league thus far, plenty of touchdown pass or catches, and Jared Goff had 4 touchdown passes himself. So the offense doing a lot for the Lions, and it's not surprising. They have a lot of weapons. They also have a really good offensive line. They've addressed that in the NFL drafts in years past, and they've got a good running back in DeAndre Swift. So no surprise to see the Lions offense doing some damage, but the defense still, I believe, is one of the worst in the NFL, and I do think the Vikings offense exploits that for most of this game. Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson still a very deadly duo, and I do think the Vikings win this game in the end. Should be a high-scoring game. I lean towards the over, but I do think the Vikings are better defensively and better offensively, so give me the Vikings laying the touchdown at home. Next up, we see the Baltimore Ravens taking on the New England Patriots. The Ravens are 3-point favorites, a total set at 43.5. Now, going into the season, there were some concerns about this Ravens defense, and we saw those concerns play out in Week 2, where Miami put up 42 points, 547 total yards, and 461 passing yards against this Ravens defense in a big comeback victory for the Dolphins. And the Patriots offense nowhere near as explosive as the Dolphins, that's for sure. But we still know the Patriots are efficient on the ground. Their offensive line held up in a big way against the Steelers, which that was the big concern for the Patriots offensively this season. They've only given up 2 sacks through the first 2 weeks, which is a big win for this offense. Mac Jones, he's been inconsistent, but last week I thought he was good enough. He made the situational throws, a couple deep throws to Nelson Aguilar and a couple other targets, and the defense has held up so far for New England. Last week, they didn't give up much on the ground. Mitchell Trubisky didn't do much in the air at all, and only 243 yards allowed. The Patriots defense has also earned 6 sacks through the first 2 weeks. Judon has had a really good start himself. So I like the Patriots in this game. I think you're getting 3 points with a game that I believe is more of a coin flip, if anything. But you're getting a home team with a really good coach in Bill Belichick and an offense that's starting to get there, starting to pick up some things, and a defense that's really strong. Give me the New England Patriots plus the 3 points at home. Next up, we see the Cincinnati Bengals taking on the New York Jets. The Bengals are 5-point favorites, and the total is set at 45 points. Now, this could certainly be considered a buy low spot for the Cincinnati Bengals. They're 0-2 overall this season. They're 0-2 against the spread. And now you're getting them at a pretty good price at laying less than a touchdown on the road. You would have to expect that the Bengals won the first 2 games like they were supposed to, as they were favorites in both of those games. They would probably be more than a touchdown favorite on the road here. And even though they're playing a Jets team that beat them outright last season, but the big concern for me right now is why I don't want to take the Bengals and laying the points is because their offensive line is it's really struggling. I mean, 13 sacks allowed through the first 2 weeks. That's 14.6% of all passing attempts that Joe Burrow has had. He has been sacked. That's just not going to get it done. The ground game has struggled because of it, even though they have very talented running backs and the head back and Joe Mixon. They still haven't really done too much on the ground. Last week, only 89 rushing yards, and the passing game didn't do too much because of that offensive line struggling. The defense has been pretty good for Cincinnati, actually. In both weeks, they've held each opponent to under 350 total yards. Now, last week, they faced a backup quarterback. Week 1, they faced Mitchell Trubisky, but they're facing Joe Flacco here, so it doesn't really get too much more difficult, even on the road here for this Bengals defense. I think this total is set just a little bit too high. I expect this one to be a lower scoring game, and when you see a lot of sacks, you see a lot of tackle for losses, and in terms of the run game, the clock is going to roll, and it's going to be more towards the under, trend more towards the under. So I'm going to take the under in this Bengals-Jets ballgame. Next up, we see the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the Washington Commanders. We're going to see the Eagles as 6.5-point favorites, and the total set at 47 points. Now, the Eagles' offenses look great through the first 2 weeks of the season. 38 points and 455 total yards in Week 1, 24 points and 486 total yards in Week 2, Monday Night Football. And, the offense is looking great. Jalen Hurts, one of his best games of his career last week against the Vikings. But I don't think enough is said about this Eagles defense. I mean, on paper, going into this season, it was one of the better ones on paper in the NFC, and the defense looked great on Monday Night Football against Kirk Cousins and the Vikings, a team that's looked pretty good offensively themselves in years past and in Week 1. So, to hold them to 264 total yards, hold them to 7 points, 62 total rushing yards. Kirk Cousins made a ton of mistakes in that game. I think this Eagles defense is one of the better defenses in the entire league, and I don't think the Commanders are going to do too much offensively, especially with a quarterback, a former Eagle himself, Carson Wentz, who's been known to make a lot of mistakes. We see him have a lot of interceptions recently this season and in years past. The Commanders' offensive line really wasn't held up at all last week against the Lions, of all teams, giving up 5 sacks in that game, and the run game has been held to under 100 rushing yards per game through the first 2 weeks. I don't like this Commanders offense outlook in this game, and I think the defense is a little bit better than what we've seen. I still think it's got some struggles or some issues, certainly in the ground defenses. They've been up 6.8 yards per carry in week 1, 8 yards per carry last week against the Lions, 191 total rushing yards. But in the end, I think the Eagles win this game, but in a more low-scoring affair, kind of what we saw in week 2. A 24-7 final score really wouldn't surprise me. So I'm going to lean towards the under and the Eagles in this one. Next up, we see the Carolina Panthers taking on the New Orleans Saints. The Panthers are 3-point dogs at home, and the total set at 40.5. To me, this is a must-win game for Matt Rule and the Panthers. I do think if they do lose this game to the Saints, I think Matt Rule and the Panthers could certainly part ways. I think the hot seat is scorching right now. The offense is not doing much of anything, and that's kind of been the case for the first few seasons under Matt Rule in Carolina. And, I know Christian McCaffrey's been in and out of the lineup for Carolina in the past couple of years, but he's healthy right now, and you're still not doing much of anything offensively. The passing game has not been effective. Baker Mayfield has struggled. Now, the defense has held up, and I think that's the shining light for this Panthers team, as the secondary is doing very well, holding both of their first two opponents to under 200 passing yards by quite a bit. They're getting some pressure on the quarterback. The ground defense has been okay, but I still think it's this defense overall is in good shape. The offense needs to get going. It's facing a Saints defense that's been inconsistent. Now, it was good against the Buccaneers overall, only giving up 260 total yards, but the turnover differential that the Saints had in that game, -4, giving the Bucs a lot of short field opportunities, and the fact that the Saints got torched on the ground in week 1 against the Falcons, giving up over 200 rushing yards in that game to a pretty weak offensive line, 5.3 yards per carry. That's concerning. Only 1 sack through the first 2 weeks. Not getting a lot of pressure on the quarterback is something I worry about. And when you give Baker Mayfield some time, he is able to be effective. He's got the weapons. DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Christian McCaffrey in the backfield. I think the Panthers are in a little bit better shape right now, especially with Alvin Kamara a little banged up. We'll have to see if he returns to the team this week. Jameis Winston making too many mistakes for me. Give me the Panthers in a must-win, desperation mode kind of game, getting the 3 points at home. Next up, we see the Jacksonville Jaguars taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. We're going to see the Chargers as 7-point favorites, and the total set at 47.5. Now, we're going to have to wait and see the injury report for this game, as Justin Herbert was banged up in Thursday Night Football last week against the Chiefs, and he is questionable for this one. Right now, the line being where it is, it does suggest that Herbert has a pretty good chance of playing, but if he does not go and Chase Daniel is the starting quarterback, we'll probably be able to get the Chargers at a much better price. And really, I like the Chargers no matter who's at quarterback for this game, as I think they're the better team on both sides of the ball. I thought that the Chargers were good enough to grab a win in Kansas City last week. They outgained the Chiefs by almost 100 total yards. The ground game defense was solid, and even though Patrick Mahomes had a pretty good completion percentage in that game, I don't think it was his best game that we've seen from him. Only 226 passing yards allowed to the Chargers gave up. So I think the Chargers defense is strong. 7 sacks earned already this season. 9.7% of opponents' passing attempts have ended in a sack for Los Angeles, which is a big win. The offensive line is held up. And even without Keenan Allen last week, the Chargers were able to move the ball through the air. Justin Herbert over 300 total passing yards. Guys like Mike Williams, DeAndre Carter, Joshua Palmer stepping it up, and even a tight end like Gerald Everett has been pretty solid this season. A lot of targets for him so far. So give me the Los Angeles Chargers here, whether it's Herbert at -7 or Chase Daniel at -3. Give me the Chargers laying the points. Next up, we see the Los Angeles Rams taking on the Arizona Cardinals. We're going to see the Rams as 3.5-point favorites. The total opened up at 50.5, but it's now down to 48.5, and I still think there's some value on the under in this game. I was really impressed with the Arizona Cardinals defensively in the second half of their game against the Raiders. They held Las Vegas to under 100 total yards. They held them to 3 points in the second half, including overtime, and it was a really good showing from Arizona defensively. They stopped the run. They got some pressure on Derek Carr. They got their first sack of the season. The secondary held up better, a lot better than the first game against the Chiefs, and I think this Cardinals defense going forward is going to improve as the season continues. And on the other side, the Rams defense, sure, they gave up 24 points total in the second half of their game against the Falcons, but still under 100 yards total in that second half. So a lot of it was short field opportunities. Matt Stafford made a few mistakes in terms of turnovers and giving the Falcons the ball in great field position. So I still think this Rams defense, one of the better defenses in the NFC this season. I think we're going to see a lower scoring game, pretty close game as well between these two rivals that know each other pretty well. So give me the under in this Rams-Cardinals battle. Next up, we see the Seattle Seahawks hosting the Atlanta Falcons. The Seahawks are 1.5-point favorites, a total set at 42 points. Now, even though the Seahawks won that first game of the season against the Broncos, and even though the 12th man is certainly the real deal, they play a very tough home atmosphere in Seattle. I still think this is one of the worst teams in the NFC this season, if not the worst team in the NFC, as on both sides of the ball, there's a lot of issues. Geno Smith is not a viable option at quarterback, in my opinion. He didn't look good last week against the 49ers. The ground game didn't do much of anything. They only put up 7 total points, 216 total yards. So that's back-to-back weeks now that they're held around 250 or less yards total offensively. And, the Atlanta Falcons, although they're not the strongest team themselves, they certainly have shown some promising signs offensively, putting up 26 and 27 points respectively in the first 2 weeks of the year. 416 yards of offense against a pretty good Saints defense in week 1. The defense has been good against the run. The secondary hasn't been the greatest, but they're able to get some pressure on the quarterback. The offensive line for Atlanta has been the real surprising thing for me. It's held up a lot better than I expected, and I think it's going to be the deciding factor in this game. I think the Falcons are the better team. I think the wrong team is favored. Even though the Seahawks have that big home field advantage, I think the Falcons are the much better team. So give me the Falcons taking the points as the road dog. It's Aaron Rodgers, it's Tom Brady, 2 future Hall of Fame quarterbacks going at it here between the Green Bay Packers and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And we see the Bucs as 1.5-point favorites, a total set at 42 points. So despite seeing 2 future Hall of Famers at quarterback, we see a low total here at 42. And, the Green Bay Packers ran the ball 38 times last week for 5.3 yards per carry and 203 total rushing yards. This has been a team that's focused on its ground game with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon in the backfield, 2 very talented running backs, 2 guys that could certainly be starters on most teams. And, Aaron Rodgers last week, 211 passing yards, the week before 227. So, I do think that this Packers team more focused on its defense and its ground game, and why not? It's very talented defensively, very good ground game, pretty good offensive line, and I think that's what you're going to see in this spot as well when you got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers kind of doing the same thing. I mean, they ran the ball 30-plus times in the first 2 weeks of the season, and Tom Brady's been held to under 200 passing yards in each week 1 and week 2. Now, both of those games were on the road against pretty good secondaries, but it just goes to show you this Buccaneers a little bit more conservative offensively so far. On the defensive side, the Buccaneers have been really good in both games. They held up the Cowboys to 3 points and 244 total yards. They forced a ton of turnovers, ton of sacks, and they didn't give up much to the Saints in week 2. 10 points allowed, 6 sacks in week 2, 4 sacks in week 1. So they're earning a sack on 12.2% of opponents' passing attempts. Really special there. And I think that's a little worrisome for the Packers, who have had an issue with the quarterback being sacked. Aaron Rodgers 7 times this season already at 10.9% of his passing attempts. So I think the Buccaneers certainly have the advantage in terms of the pass rush. And I think overall this is going to be a pretty fun game to watch. I like the under as well, even though it's a really low total. I think there actually is some value on the under. I think it's going to be a close game. I think taking the points with Green Bay, not a bad idea, but give me the under in this Packers-Buccaneers matchup. Next up, we see the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Denver Broncos. This is your Sunday Night Football contest on NBC. Now, the Niners are 1.5-point favorites, and the total is set at 45 points. Now, both teams have played some pretty weak competition this season. The Niners playing the Bears and the Seahawks, the Broncos playing the Seahawks and the Texans, and both teams are 1-1. So, 2 teams that wish they were 2-0 when you look at the competition they've played. But, I think both teams defensively have been really strong. Offensively, a little inconsistent. Russell Wilson hasn't been great with his new team quite yet. He was really good in the second half of that game against the Seahawks, but wasn't sharp last week against the Texans. I do think he'll improve, especially if the Broncos can get Jerry Jeudy back in the lineup. It does look like his injury is, I think it's trending upward rather than downward. I think he'll be returning sooner rather than later, which is a good sign for the Broncos offensively. But I do think even without Jeudy in the lineup for this game, the Broncos still have enough weapons offensively to get the job done. And I think Russell Wilson's a better quarterback compared to Jimmy G. I know Jimmy G is still a solid guy to come in as a backup. I think most teams would love to have, if their starting quarterback went down, to have Jimmy G as their backup. But this offense a little bit more conservative, a little bit more traditional pocket passer. Jimmy G is not going to be the dual threat explosive guy that Trey Lance was, but I think he'll be able to hold down the fort season long for the Niners. But in this game on the road, I just don't love his chances to win this kind of game. I think this is going to be a Broncos win by a field goal at the most, but you're getting points right now with Denver, so I do think there's some value with the home team. Give me the Denver Broncos and the 1.5 points as the home team. It's your Monday Night Football contest on ESPN between the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Football Giants. The Giants are 2-0 to start the season. They're laying 2 points in this game. The total set at 39. Now the Cowboys 1-1 after their big win over the Bengals last week. That was a home game, 20-17 final. Cooper Rush leading the Cowboys to victory as the backup quarterback. He had a pretty good game in that one, 19 of 31 for 230 passing yards total. The run game was solid with Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott. I would say Pollard definitely had the better game of the two, and the defense especially getting to the quarterback for 6 sacks, holding the Bengals to under 100 rushing yards. The secondary was pretty good against Joe Burrow, a pretty talented quarterback with a great receiver in Jamar Chase. They held them to 17 total points, a big win for this Dallas Cowboys defense. And I think defense is going to be the big thing in this game as well. A primetime game. We've seen the under trend pretty nicely in primetime games this season. The New York Giants offensively haven't been the greatest this year, but the defense has helped them win ball games, especially last week when the going got tough. The Giants defense stepped it up against Baker Mayfield. They held him to 14 of 29 passing, only 129 passing yards. They got some pressure on him, forced 2 sacks. They were pretty good against the run for the most part. A couple big runs by McCaffrey kind of exploded those numbers a bit, but overall, really good defensive showing by the Giants. And I think this is going to be a defensive first game between two teams with quarterbacks I don't really trust right now in Daniel Jones and Cooper Rush. Give me the under in this Cowboys-Giants game to end the week. And that's it. Those are the games for week 3 of the NFL season. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to put your football plays in the comments section below. Again, if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at Pick Dawgz Premium. As always, this is Ron Romanelli. Good luck, and let's crush those books.